What frustrates you the most about filmmaking?
It's kind of the best and the worst thing about it. It's the fact that you have to rely on so many factors and people and circumstances outside of your control, you know? And I think what's different about filmmaking as opposed to painting is, I can go in my room, I can paint. Nobody has to bother me. I don't have to worry about the train going by and making noise. I don't have to worry about the sunset. You know, I control everything essentially. With filmmaking, if we don't show up at the little window of time where the sun is perfect and the traffic's not too loud and the dog walkers aren't out in full force and we have the location the way we want it, like it's such a weird, like, specific thing you're going for in film. But that's also why I love it, because I love working with people. I love communicating ideas, even if you have to butt heads a little bit to get to that end result. It's always worth it because it's a giant collaboration. And as much as I do on my own with filmmaking, I don't ever want to do a film truly on my own unless I just have to. But I always enjoy working with someone, whether the crew is 3 people or 30. I've done both. And I always enjoy working with people to problem solve. And it's truly like a puzzle. Like, one of my favorite video games is Tetris. And I think that's like by design, because I always love problem solving. And I think that, as creative as filmmaking is, there is that like slight analytical component to it with the problem solving. So.
Anything that frustrates you about filmmakers?
Yeah, I think, and I mean, we're all guilty of it, but I think filmmakers, sometimes we tend to think a little too much about ourselves and our films, our crews, our characters, our. And I think we forget, like, what is the landscape of this general industry looking like? What are we leaving behind? How are we ushering in the next generation of filmmakers? Are we sticking out our hand, or are we turning our back? And I've had a lot of backs turned on me. Like, when I first got in this industry, like when I worked on some of the bigger, crew sets on TV shows, and I did some reality shows, PA Works and stuff like that. Like, I was telling people I was writing a feature, and they were like, "You're never going to make that." Like, people would say that to my face. Like, "You're never going to make that. If you think you can make it for $2,000, you're crazy. You're going to burn out. I wouldn't recommend it. Don't do that." I heard no so many times. And while I knew it was going to be a challenge, I also was cognizant enough to think, okay, this maybe isn't the best look for the industry. And I'm not saying that's a broad brush for sure. But a lot of times I think that we're also focused on what we are doing. We're not thinking about kind of the general landscape out there. Does it look inviting? Does it welcome anyone new in? Or is it the same people doing the same thing because we're all just kind of taking what we can? And if you realize that, you have to ask, why is that happening? And, sometimes you can't fault people for, trying to make their film, because it's hard. It really is hard. And, a lot of times there's not a lot of room and not a lot of pie left on the plate, if you will, for thinking about the future and thinking about everyone else. But it's something I try to do, anytime I have a film in production. I try to reach out to like the local high schools and colleges and film schools and get the people there involved and try to like show them that, hey, this isn't super glamorous, but it's possible. And if you ever need help, seriously, give me a call. I'll hold a boom pole. I'll do what I can. Like, it's that kind of like just small effort. And it can really only be made on a person to person basis. I can't do that for everyone in the whole filmmaking landscape, but just kind of reaching out to others who may be, hitting the same walls you were hitting when you started in the industry, I think is really crucial.
Do you think sometimes, though, early rejection is almost a blessing?
It is, yeah. I think when you are rejected, it forces you to reassess what you're doing, even just temporarily. And I think a lot of times you can choose to let it beat you down, or you can choose to turn that into like fuel and turn that into something to really rev your engine and keep you going. And almost like, you know what, you don't think I can do it? Here we go. Let's make it happen. Let's involve some other people. If you don't want to be involved, all good. Let's find some folks who are interested. And so I think it's truly how you respond to the situation. And sometimes, like, I'll be honest, some of my early films that got rejected, I took it a lot more personally than I do if a film of mine gets rejected now. Because at first you're so connected to your film because it's, your first short. Like, you're so happy that you got it made, and then you spent a bunch of money on film festivals that you got from working your part-time job, and then you see that turn into a bunch of rejections, and then you're like, oh man, what's the problem? And a lot of times, the problem isn't you. The problem is, that film festival only has 20 slots and they got like 1,000 entries, and this year they're programming films with this theme and your film has a totally opposite theme. It doesn't mean your film's bad. It just means it's not what they're looking for. And so you have to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the goals of the film festival, or look at the goals of the distributor and like what they're trying to do, not just, your own little isolated bubble of your film, and kind of realize there's a much broader industry and a much broader world out there that your film just may not fit into, and that's okay. And like a lot of times, like I said earlier, you need to learn when to leave a film on the floor and just be like, hey, I'm done with it. I'm proud. I learned my lesson. But at this point, I don't know what else I can get from that. So let's move on and let's do something else.
I know you've mentioned that a lot, and I think that's interesting about leaving, knowing when, like, okay, this got this many views and I'm good. I finished it. I've submitted it this many times. When did you learn that lesson? When did you realize this is when it's time to walk away from this one?
I think it was after the distribution of Son of Clowns. It was recent. I mean, this is like 2016, so not super long time ago. It was just kind of seeing like, man, we worked so hard. Like, seriously, we worked so hard to make this indie feature in North Carolina. And then we did the film festivals, and then we put it out, and it definitely got like for a first film, a nice little modest viewing. And then after that, it kind of teetered off a little bit. And I was like, man, what's wrong? What's happening? And then I thought a little more and I said, well, this is step one. This is not step 100. This is just the first step on the rung of ladder. And, the ladder is long. There's not a need to focus on this first step so much. And it was kind of zooming out, and it was able to say, hey, is this film serving me anymore? I'm still, obviously always going to be attached to it. I love the film. Film's my baby. Like, I love making these projects, and it's always funny, like, to revisit them years and years later, because it's almost like watching something. Like, I don't really watch my own films, but like occasionally I'll like go back and be like 5-10 years later, I'll be like, what did that happen? What is that looking like now? And you watch it and you're like, oh man, this is like such a crucial lesson, because I never would have done it now in that way I did it then. But that's the point. It's like it got you to where you are now. And I think it's able to teach you something. And I think that's the point. It doesn't need to be, any more complicated than that.